All right, welcome everybody to the Lakers Legacy Podcast, where you can't spell Redick without a D, but can you spell some Lakers W's without a D? Is the real question. So, buckle up. This is not a drill. We are officially less than 1 week away from the start of the 2024-25 NBA season. So, JJ Redick or not, here the Lakers come. I'm your host, Jonathan Hernandez, and I'm joined by my co host, Tommy Alexander. And Tommy, basketball is as back as it can get. Are you ready for the return of the peanut gallery and some of the most terrible takes you've ever heard in your life?
I definitely am ready. It seems like the takes get worse and worse every year as social media becomes more and more a part of our lives. But yeah, notwithstanding all of that, I'm ready, excited to see what happens. I think it's going to be an interesting year, especially in the West.
Yeah, I think a lot of teams are in flux, including the Lakers. So, yeah, it's definitely going to be an interesting year. But yeah, glad to have basketball back. So, obviously, in this episode, we're going to talk about last night's Lakers preseason game versus the Golden State Warriors and generally assess where we think the Lakers stand after 4 preseason games and kind of just naturally segue that into our thoughts heading into the beginning of the NBA regular season. So, why don't we just get right into it? And we have been texting back and forth ever since the end of last night's game, Tommy. So why don't you just give me your general thoughts on, what happened last night? Because last night was supposed to be, quote unquote, the first dress rehearsal for the regular season. And what we ended up getting was like I don't know, there's very uneven energy and consistency by the team as a whole. Outside of AD, who looked very good on both ends and continues to hit his jump shots and look very spry on the defensive end. He had that putback dunk that was insane. Outside of AD, the Lakers looked pretty haphazard, most especially on defense. They were kind of getting into the motions of their sets, but they weren't hitting their shots, which has been a consistent theme this preseason. And on the season, over the 4 games in preseason, the Lakers are shooting 42% from the field and 29% from 3, jacking up 39 3-point shots a game. So something's got to give at some point, and obviously it's just preseason. These guys need reps, and these guys need reps in the prism of JJ Redick's new sort of mentality with regards to what's a good 3-point shot, what's not a good 3-point shot, giving them the green light to shoot, et cetera, et cetera. I think they're exploring the bounds of what they can or can't do in this preseason, but at the same time, we have 2 preseason games left and the regular season starts next Tuesday. So with that said, why don't you talk to me about your concerns regarding last night's game and just like the haphazardness and lacklusterness of it all?
So I think my biggest overall concern is I'll say 2 things. One is, and they're both related to the same, I guess, general point, which is we haven't seen anything to disprove, the kind of factors that we had about this team that sort of limit the team's upside. And I think those things are, overall end of actual rotation depth and defense. In terms of, I guess I'll start with the defense. I just feel like, we're 4 games into the preseason. For all intents and purposes, like 80% of the preseason is over because in the last game, it's the second night of we play tomorrow and then we have another game, second night of a back-to-back. I highly doubt we're going to play any starters. I think to the extent we play any rotation players, it's going to be limited minutes. And so it's like, you can expect that's going to be like largely a bench game. So we should be a lot farther along, in my opinion, than where we are defensively. I think the guys look completely lost on that end. We knew we were approaching this season with a personnel deficit on that end, and it's just looked as like even worse, in my opinion, than I thought. You kind of give them the first couple games of the preseason. All right, they're just like getting cardio in, right? The third game, we did have a comeback win, and so it's like, okay, maybe this will like maybe they'll start to take it seriously. The first game we start to like actually quote unquote take it seriously, it just doesn't really feel like anything has actually improved. Um, I think it's like the situation is made a little bit worse by the fact that the team that we were playing on paper should have the same defensive deficiencies that we do. But they are actually one of the best defensive teams in the preseason so far. They're limiting teams to like 14 points per game less than us. And they play a bunch of small guards who want to shoot threes, around like one defensive minded guy, really. And so I guess like I'm just a little bit concerned about what is the plan or what is the scheme defensively, and why is it the case that it feels like, with the season starting in less than a week, we're not even close on that end to being productive. And I guess that, sort of lends itself to the second point, which is the end of bench depth. We don't have the talent on this roster. I think we have decent 1 through 8 talent. We do not have, though, the talent that we have, or the surplus of talent that's going to allow us to ease into this season. Our starters, as constructed, our starters are really going to have to carry us, right? And I think the problem with the end of bench depth, I'm talking, maybe it's unfair to even call it end of bench depth. I'm really talking about like the 3 guys off the bench, maybe 4 guys when Vando comes back. Sort of the issue we're having there is all of those guys are one-dimensional, and you're sort of seeing the problems with that. As those guys who are going to have a bigger learning curve with the offense, sort of figure out what they're doing offensively, it's going to make for some really, really bad lineups. And it doesn't matter how good, Gabe and Max, even Jackson Hayes and Vando when he comes back can be for us defensively, because that group is so inept offensively that it's, going to lead to tons of transition opportunities for the other team. That's like, I guess my overall concern with what I've seen so far is we needed to be like, I think by now, like to have a decent start to the season, we needed to have shown signs of, either the depth is going to be a little bit better than we thought, or the defense has figured out some ways to scheme around our talent deficiencies on that end. And I guess 4 games in, I would have expected more. I think we were all enthusiastic. I was certainly optimistic after the first few games. But after coming in 5 days of rest, and I call it rest, but it's like, we should have had a good amount of practice in between and an opportunity against a team that we're familiar with to sort of show some things. And it's just like night and day, in my opinion, the difference between the two teams. And by the way, Golden State also is adding like 5 new rotation guys to their lineup. And they just look like months and months and months ahead of where we are right now, which again is concerning. Like we talk so much about like we were 3 games back of the team that made the finals last year. But we were also like 3 games ahead of like being out of the playoffs. So it's like the margin for error is small. It's smaller when you consider the talent that we have on our roster. And we can't be like limping into the season or like using the first 2 months to like figure things out, because the Warriors are not a team that are like, oh, everyone is viewing them as a clear lock to be a top playoff seed. The Warriors being this far ahead of us at this stage in the season should actually be very concerning to, I think, a lot of people, because that's another team that, could kick us down. So yeah. I don't know. Those are just, I guess, some high level thoughts, but I frankly left that game feeling not super enthused by where things stand. Where guys seem like physically and mentally, it just feels like not where it should be right now.
So I did not leave that game feeling enthused as well. I was not enthralled by the team's transition defense or lack thereof. They were very slow-footed to get back on pretty much every transition play. And even if the ball went into the basket on our end, we were jogging back and backpedaling a lot. And then obviously there was a lot of miscommunication with regards to our defensive scheme, that weird hybrid zone switch man scheme that we have, where it seemed like on multiple occasions during the night we'd have two guys sort of sprinting out to one player and then just getting lost on another player who was cutting to the basket or wide open from three. And so the communication wasn't there. And on a team like ours with the defensive deficit in personnel that we have, as you mentioned, the margin for error is so small that we have to be crisp and tight in our rotations and our communication. And right now, that just isn't the case. I do want to pull back though and say that I feel like, I'm not saying your sentiments are wrong, that those are your sentiments, but I do feel like it's a little bit of recency bias, because if we just erase this last game, I mean, that was our first dress rehearsal game, right? So for me, it's almost like I'm, and maybe it's just an expectation thing. This is kind of how I thought the team would be. Like, we would have to rely on our offense to carry us through. And thus far, the missing ingredient has been the offensive part. We're only averaging like 106 points per game, and shooting 42% from the field and 29% from the field. So, yeah, of course, I'm concerned by the defense from last night's game. But with regards to the prior three games, I have been encouraged by at least the intensity and effort by most players to fight through screens, to crash the boards. I mean, Rui Hachimura has significantly improved in that regard. Jackson Hayes is getting offensive rebounds. D'Angelo Russell is doing what he can. So, I mean, for me, it's almost like, yeah, I'm definitely concerned about the defense, but I was concerned heading into the season, So it's like nothing is really jarring me too much. And actually, the type of motion offense that the Warriors are playing, the reason why they look night and day better than us is we are at phase one of trying to get to where the Warriors are at in terms of implementing the system. They are, Curry and Draymond Green have been running this for like the last 15 years. And we are now only starting to kind of consistently do it with this group. And so it is going to take like this. Sadly, we don't have the time, but just naturally, it's going to take a learning curve period for us to get in sync. And what I'm kind of discouraged by is us not making shots, because that was supposed to be the thing that helped tide that was supposed to be the thing that helped tide us over. And I think the other thing why I call it a little bit of recency bias is because at the end of the day, the thing that's going to tide us over outside of our offense is just LeBron James and Anthony Davis. And if this was a true dress rehearsal and if this was a real game, LeBron James would not have played the way that he did last night on both ends of the court, particularly on the defensive end. And so that's kind of just the reality of where the Lakers stand. It's night and day because LeBron James was kind of like lollygagging along for the first half. He only scored like 6 points, was like 2 of 9. And then on the defensive end, he just wasn't kind of moving his feet at all. So for me, like, you asterisk some things, you red flag definitely kind of just, for me, it's like red flag something that I already knew. It's just a little bit more exacerbated. Like, oh yeah, actually, we don't have the defensive personnel. And then I feel like it's recency bias even to talk about the bench depth, because prior to this game, right, if we remove this game, Max Christie, Gabe Vincent, and Jackson Hayes, and actually Dalton Knecht have been really pretty good off the bench, right? So it's just like, I think last night's game was a reminder of, if those guys are not holding up their end of the bargain, and we get offers from Gabe Vincent and Max Christie, that's when the bottom really falls off for this team. So I'm kind of not sure what to properly asterisk and what not to asterisk. You know what I'm talking about? Because it's like, it's preseason. We only have, but at the same time, we only have 2 games left. At the same time, this was our first dress rehearsal. LeBron James wasn't playing like LeBron James. Like, I guess what would you say? And I'll take it to break here first, and I'll leave you with this question. Before we take it to break, the question I want to leave you with is, what would you say are questions that you feel like could have a lingering effect into the regular season if not actually addressed? Or what concerns do you feel like are absolutely and maybe this isn't possible given the circumstance and context of a preseason game, but are there any things that you've seen that you can't caveat or that you wouldn't caveat at all? So with that said, let's take it to break. When we return, let's get Tommy's answer. All right, so we are back. So Tommy, to remind you of my question, because those were some long, exciting ads that we just listened to. You may have forgotten the question, but yeah, with regards to the context of preseason and just trying to sift through the mud of like, was LeBron James trying? Was he not? Do we have to take to account that LeBron James will not try on some nights? And so, what are the rest of the guys going to do? Gabe Vincent and Max Christie have been playing well. In fact, Gabe Vincent was one of the encouraging players who was shooting well. He was probably the only player shooting well from three, you know? Like, how do I think you know what I'm talking about? How do we sift through that? And what are you sort of trying to nail down in terms of like, this is a real concern? No caveats should be added to this.
I think the two things, well, I guess I'll repeat myself on one and then I'll add another. One is like the bench depth again. And it's not even necessarily are these guys, like the four guys that we're all anticipating are going to be the rest of the top nine rotation outside of the starters. It's not really a question of are those guys like good enough to be top nine rotation players. I mean, look, people can argue about Jackson Hayes. I think Vando, Gabe Vincent, and Max Christie are not bad top nine rotation types, right? And they'll have ups and downs, but everybody has ups and downs. I think the issue is when you really look at that group, it kind of highlights how one-dimensional so much of the talent is. And again, we kind of knew that coming into it, but it does beg the question of, does JJ have his rotations and staggering of lineups figured out? It doesn't feel like outside of the starting five, we have a group of five guys that has looked consistently good together. And again, it just feels like at this point, that should be the case. I think the second thing is, I'll go to the offense and yeah, some of this you could chalk up to it's preseason and guys are getting their legs under them. And we've been a bottom five, overall shooting and bottom five 3-point shooting team. I think we're certainly bottom 10 offensive efficiency. And you could say like, well, we got off to a slow start last year and, there's a number of things you can point to. I guess the one thing that I'm concerned about, again, we have seen, just like the eye test has shown us that there is more movement. There are more actions happening in this offense. There's a lot less standing around. Even when AD, our offense devolves into like, let's ISO for AD in the post. It does feel like because our offense, there seems to be some directive from the coaching staff about making sure we don't fall into too much random and we are running our sets. It feels like that has encouraged more off-ball movement and cutting. The offensive rebounding has been better. Certain things that the coaching staff highlighted, it does seem like are being implemented. I guess, the lingering concern I'll have going into the season that until it's proven otherwise, I don't think can be caveated is, this team was a top, I don't know, 5 to 8% percentage 3-point shooting team last year, and we've been horrific in the preseason, and we are missing some decent looks. But I guess like the question that I have is, we all like the beautiful offense, we all like the interesting sets, we've run way more cohesive sets than it seemed like we did pretty much all of last year with Darvin consistently. But at what point do we have to like take a step back and say this is just theatrics and not actually, at what point do we have to, I guess, consider, are these sets actually getting us advantages? It does feel like a lot of our sets end up in Austin, yeah, he's technically open, but he's sprinting at full speed, from one side of the court to another, curling around a Jackson Hayes screen. All of this to develop like an open shot that is an open shot, but is a fadeaway 3-pointer. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, are those the quality of shots that, we're really looking for? It's not like pin down screen and get a guy an open look, which we have done, and those are simple sets. You can think of one in the second half of the game last night that led to a Dalton Knecht 3 out of a timeout. But I guess like how much of
I have a
that,
question for you,
yeah.
Go ahead. Regarding this topic, how much of it do you think is like It's obviously early. How much of it do you think is them trying to sort of extend their bounds and trying to understand, okay, this is JJ Redick's directive. I'm sure at some point, I mean, I hope that they will pull back on the shot selection. Like, how much of it do you think is really just this learning curve? Because it's not like, the new directive is get up volume, because I think towards the end of the second half of last season, we were, I think, a top 5 3-point shooting team. We were like 38%, right? But the volume was still low. I think there's naturally going to be a learning curve, right? When JJ Redick says, okay, we're going to raise our volume. And so, how much of it do you think is like the guys just learning, trying to understand for themselves what is a good shot, what isn't a good shot, especially in the scheme of, to your point, this set where, okay, we did all these things. I curled off of a screen like 3 different times. I did get the ball, but you're right. There is a player charging at me, but I just did all of that. I better shoot it, versus guys kind of like melding more of their natural instincts as a basketball player and getting out of that schematic sense of things. Do you know what I'm saying? Because I feel like right now we are very much in the early stages of everything is about learning how to be a cohesive unit and do this beautiful basketball thing regardless of the results. But at the same time, I feel like it's coming at the expense of who Austin Reeves is as a player, in terms of, that 3-point shot you were talking about normally. And I think I know what you're talking about. It's the 3-point shot where Anthony Davis like passed it to him behind his legs, right? Like between his legs. Normally, Austin Reeves wouldn't pump fake and then take like a step back fadeaway three. He would pump fake and then drive to the basket, right? Or normally, if D'Angelo Russell had his ways, he would call for a pick and roll or a double drag, and D'Angelo Russell would get into a rhythm. But right now, it seems like all the guys are sort of focused on, let me get to my spots right. And obviously, I don't think that's the wrong decision, but I think it's going to be up to JJ Redick and the rest of the players to sort of, really juggle this and do a really good balance, have a really good balance of like when to know that, all right, we got our reps in. Now we got to also just lean into the strengths of these players. You know what I'm saying?
I do know what you're saying. And I guess the only thing I can really say in response is, we are running generally, obviously we have a new coach, we have new principles, we are running some new offense. A lot of what we're running, like these guys have seen, okay, like
Yeah.
our starting five has played a lot of minutes together at this point, and or at least has been on the same team together, for a while. I Even guys like Max Christie obviously has been on the team for a couple years. Gabe was sitting a lot, but he was around last year. Jackson Hayes was around last year. Like these guys have played together, and a lot of the plays that we're running, they've run before. Maybe they didn't run it at the same frequency, but they've run a lot of this stuff before. It's not like we're suddenly implementing the
Okay.
triangle offense now.
Yeah,
And
but don't you think some of the shots they're taking are like, let me just chuck up this three to chuck up this three
well,
because
but
Coach
how
Redick
much of
wants
that?
more
Well,
threes?
yeah, but that's the problem then, right? It's like, is the directive volume at the expense of all else? Because if that's the directive, then that's not going to work. I guess
Yeah.
what I'm saying is like, to your point, I think in games 1 and games 2, when Austin shot like 2 for 15, okay, over the course of those 2 games, I think when we talked after those games, a lot I had the same feeling. Okay, they're sort of trying to push the limits of, Austin is a new role a little bit in this offense. Like, where is he going to find his looks? Max Christie forcing up some shots in game 2 of the preseason. He's just getting comfortable. Where is he going to find his looks? We're not like in game 4 of the preseason. We're in a game that, like, the first 3 quarters, effectively, other than taking Austin out in the third, we kind of ran a rotation that we would run game 1 of the season. Um, and so, I guess that's where my concern comes. It feels like a lot of what we're doing is like whipping the ball around that doesn't, but not really creating an advantage. And
Mhm.
and so like maybe that changes, but I just like we can say, well, it's preseason. It's preseason for everyone, and I think like among the teams that maybe folks don't expect us to be a playoff team, but among the teams that are like supposed to be playoff teams, we have looked, in my opinion, as worse than anyone except for like Denver. Dallas
I don't know if you've seen the Sacramento Kings, man. They're playing
and
guys 35
Sacramento.
minutes a night, and
And
they're 0 and
Sacramento.
5.
I will add Sacramento to the list. But my point is, it's a short list and we're on it.
Sure.
I think like most other teams who are expected to be good have shown something, and they're not all playing their guys 35 minutes a night. You know, they're also playing bench guys. They're also giving other guys looks. And I think that's, you know, another reason that I'm a little concerned is like, this is supposed to be a system now. It's not just supposed to be only our top 5 guys can play. It's like, well, we're building like a whole system for everyone. And if anything, it's like the only group that has looked really effective running that system was when we ran out the all like Exhibit 10 lineup and like and G League lineup. And like those guys like ran the offense and played defense and you know competed. And they competed against other G Leaguers, but my point is it's like it looked like there was a plan. And so I guess like I haven't really seen, in my opinion.
What about the Suns game when LeBron James and AD first came? I felt like that was the most that especially that first half when like they were running those like well, I don't even know what the screen is, but Gabe Vincent would screen for LeBron James. LeBron James would set another screen, and then D'Angelo Russell would cut to the basket, and AD would hit him for the bounce pass. And like the first play out of the first play of that game was like I mean, these are simple sets, but they were running it to perfection. So I think we've seen glimpses, but
I think we
I
have
get your
seen,
point.
yeah, I think we've seen glimpses. Okay, and especially on the offensive end, we've seen more glimpses than on the defensive end. But again, it's just like at some point, and JJ is going to have to like step up and say something about this at some point. But like, it can't just be, well, it looks better, and the result, the results will come later, because it's like we're not. Like I was trying to say earlier, like it's not like we're going from Darvin Ham to like now suddenly we're asking a bunch of young guys and veterans to run the triangle offense or like some completely crazy new thing that's so far out of left field. A lot of what we're asking these guys to do, they've done in some form or fashion, either in their careers or even last year. So it shouldn't, to me, I don't think it should be as like, it feels so off for I think where we
I
are. And part of, by the way, what we both talked about in the off season, was the continuity giving us an advantage. I just don't think that we are even close to, having any sort of advantage from having the same group of guys as last year. Based on what I've seen so far, it seems like guys are even more confused.
Well, how much of that though is them trying to service their new coach and actually adhere to let's lay the foundation? Because that's the point I was kind of getting at. I feel like we're almost overcompensating with the set book, like let's run all these sets every single time. And for me, it's almost like I feel like we need to do a better job, or JJ Redick needs to do a better job of toggling back to the specific skill sets of his players. And obviously he's done it for LeBron James and AD, putting him in the triple threat position. But at some point, I feel like we are sort of exchanging continuity and what these guys do well. Some like simple pick and rolls with D'Angelo Russell is what I'm talking about. Like simple inverted screens with Austin Reeves and LeBron James, even inverted screens with D'Angelo Russell and Austin Reeves. Like we haven't seen any of that, or
Right.
barely any of that, because it seems like they're so focused on every set down. Let's run through the progressions of trying to get these multiple sets within one possession down. You know what I mean? So like for me, it's like, are they going to break out of it at some point? Or are they going to do a better job of juggling and balancing things where it's like not every play has to be like JJ Redick proving to himself that he knows basketball. You know what I mean?
I think that's the concern that I have. We don't know because JJ Redick has never coached, and as pretty as this offense looks, we just don't know. And so it's like that I think is really what my concern really boils down to is, 80% of the way through the preseason in the game that you view as like a 3-quarter, dress rehearsal, you would hope that like we would have a better sense of where he stands with that. We're not the defending champs. We're not coming off like multiple seasons of success. We have a lot to prove, and it feels weird that like here we are another like 80% of the way. We gave these guys so much props for how they looked in those first, especially in game 2, to your point, against Phoenix, right? And that looked a lot more cohesive than we looked in preseason last year. But yeah, at some point something has to give, and it's not just can JJ Redick prove to you that he can draw up like the sexiest playbook. It has to be, are these plays actually like creating advantages for this group, and so far I don't think they are.
Yeah.
And hopefully that
Well,
changes, but I don't know. Again, 80% of the way through, I think that's like fair. Like it's less than a week until the season starts. If we played Minnesota tomorrow, they would destroy us, in my opinion.
I think for me, I'm kind of more like this is what I expected, and I expected it to take some time, regardless of what we want to happen, and obviously sooner rather than later. But I feel like we kind of hopefully it doesn't take this long, right? But I remember last season we were like, what this 5-out thing doesn't work, and a lot of that was muddled by the rotational decisions that Darvin Ham made. But I think in the second half of the season, when the right lineups were played, we kind of saw the fruition of the work that they had put in 5-out wise, and we started to see some of that beautiful basketball. So I think it's just naturally going to take some time, and you hope that JJ Redick knows when to pull out. No sexual innuendo intended. But yeah, so why don't we end this episode talking about like some continued positive things that we've seen, just to end on a brighter note as we head into the regular season. I think for me, so I guess I'll kind of give you the spoiler alert of the two positive things I want to talk about, and it's going to be AD and Dalton Knecht, in spite of the fact that he has shot pretty horribly. But and then you can give your own or tack on to what I mentioned here. But AD so far has looked pretty phenomenal. He looks very healthy and spry, and I'm very encouraged by that. Through 3 preseason games, Anthony Davis is averaging 17 points on 58% from the field, 9 rebounds, 2 assists, 1.3 blocks, 1 steal in just 23 minutes a game. Um, he looks in rhythm with his jump shot. He does not have an awkward running gait. He looks like he's in mid-season form. And so if there's anything to sort of take solace in and be excited about, I think it's Anthony Davis. And then besides Anthony Davis, so Dalton Knecht, I think he needs to pull back a little in terms of he's taking shots that he took in Tennessee when they were doing the connect rules on him. You know what I'm saying? Where it's like, I know you can hit that shot at your highest level, but you're still a rookie. Um, I love the fact that, I mean, it's crazy to me how many design sets JJ Redick has just drawn up for Dalton Knecht. But even in his misses, you can tell that Dalton Knecht is the most movement shooteriest shooter that we have on this team. And maybe that's a problem, like Austin Reeves tries to do it. He can't do it. D'Angelo Russell is more of a straight catch and shoot guy, or give him the ball so he can step back a little bit. But Dalton Knecht is the most like, it doesn't matter which way I'm turning, whether my shoulders are squared, whether my legs are flailing this way or that way, I can get this shot off pretty cleanly. Whether or not I make it is another question, but I think last night we saw him finally get into a groove and hit 3 threes. So I don't know. At least I think the one guy who's ahead of the curve right now is Dalton Knecht, because we're seeing Dalton Knecht at his worst, but more and more as every game passes, I'm like, oh shoot, is Dalton Knecht this important to this team? Because he's one of the best bench players that we have, or one of the best players we have in general. He's averaging 14 points, which is second highest on the team. Obviously, it's preseason, it doesn't mean that much, but in terms of like the volume that he can put up and his sort of relentlessness and not being phased by his misses and just continuing to sort of like stick with it, I've been very encouraged by Dalton Knecht so far. So anything to add about AD and Knecht, or any other positives that you want to tack on?
So AD looks great. I agree. He is like the one guy on the team, and I'm counting LeBron, who looks like he's ready uh, to start the season. You know what I mean? And it, he is our star in his prime. LeBron is no longer in his prime. So you hope that your star in their prime looks like this, and AD is there already. Which again, that has been like the one bright spot, I think, despite all like my overall negative takes about a lot of this. Um, I think Dalton, you made a lot of good points. I think the thing about Dalton that I always think is like it's interesting because he's been bad but looked good, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
he hasn't been what he is going to be. He is clearly going to be like a much better shooter than this, and I'm not worried about his shooting. Rookies always struggle with shooting, and it's like even harder, when you're coming into a team that's like played together and they're trying to implement their new offense, and you don't really know where you fall in the rotation. I mean, there's like a lot of kind of factors here. Um, But yeah, I think the one guy I'll also kind of point to is Rui. I think Rui has been up and down defensively. I thought against you and I talked about this offline. I thought against the Bucks he looked horrific defensively. I thought he wasn't there. He wasn't. I don't know if he wasn't trying or what was going on with him, but he looked terrible. I think overall, though, his clear focus on rebounding, we have not seen him like consistently this many times in a row, like crash the boards this effectively on both ends. He's clearly,
7 rebounds in 24 minutes, which is kind of crazy for
which
him.
is crazy for him. That's like more than what he averaged like playing full games last
Yep.
year. So, that's like been very, very encouraging to me. I, but again, it's all sort of tempered by this fact of like the guys need to figure it out defensively. I mean, we're like starting this group with Rui. It can't just be rebounding. He's got to be able to like consistently give something defensively. And I don't know. I think I like these are some bright spots, but overall defense, LeBron's conditioning. I think there are so many things that I'm concerned about that it's hard for me to focus on the bright spots right now.
The near 40-year-old guy is conditioning. He needs to definitely step it up. Um, yeah. So yeah, I think the other thing that has been made even more clear. I mean, it was already clear to us, but like, holy crap, we need Jared Vanderbilt and Christian Wood healthy. Like Christian Wood, the guy that people wanted to cut. Like we could use some offensive punch off of the bench that isn't so reliant on. And I don't want to extend this conversation, but like all the sets and stuff, I feel like it's catered towards, in some ways, it is a double edged sword because I think in the long run, if we get this down, it will help us, right? But it feels like we are neutering the strengths of our own players. And there have been portions in the last 2 years, and D'Angelo Russell has said so himself, where kind of just winging it off of the creative skill sets and potent offensive like prowess that a lot of our guys have. Sometimes just winging it with those guys works. And so maybe we're just taking our lumps right now and doing all of these sets just so it's drilled into people's heads so that we have like a foundation to fall back on. But I feel like all of these sets are geared more towards like our bench unit, like Gabe Vincent and Max Christie. And so I don't think we've yet seen like the full potential of this team. And I don't know if we're going to see it unless JJ Redick has the magical ability to sort of do that tug and pull perfect balance of when to let our guys be our guys in terms of D'Lo, you be D'Lo, and then on the next play, hey guys, let's run a structured thing so that, we have something to fall back on. I guess that is the question we're all going to be trying to answer the next few games, and especially game one of the regular season. But I think what we're going to see the first few games, Tommy, is LeBron James and Anthony Davis trying to go for 30, you know? Um, because I feel like that's the only way that kind of glues this sort of mishmash team together as they try and not only withstand the injuries to some of their best rebounders and defenders, but also just withstand, this acclamation to a new head coach and trying to service him because they really like him. They want to play hard for him. But at the same time, is it coming at the expense of the continuity of what they know as players themselves and what they've built as a group, just sort of winging it, as D'Angelo Russell would say? But yeah, with that said, that'll do it. The next time we talk to everybody, the next time I talk to you, Tommy, will be the start of the NBA regular season and the start of the Lakers regular season, which is absolutely nuts. Hopefully, we pick up a couple wins here and there the next two games. And if we do play against the Warriors and they have their legitimate lineup out and we have our legitimate lineup out there for at least a quarter, hopefully we look a lot better. But with that said, follow us on Twitter at Lakers Legacy Pod. Please also rate and review us 5 stars on the Apple Podcast app and Spotify app. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Lakers Legacy Pod. And with that said, Tommy, I will see you next time at the start of the NBA regular season.
Peace.
Laters.